Welcome to the Community Development Podcast, a podcast dedicated to community development practice and approaches, sharing our learning and connecting the workforce. My name is Russell. I have the very great pleasure of the return to the podcast with Helen Griffiths. How are you, Helen?
Lovely to be back, thanks.
And we're in your gardens. We are doing this socially distant, and the sun has gone in and the wind has picked up, which is obviously inevitable the minute you get the mic out. So a little bit of background noise, but it hopefully adds an authenticity to suburban Cardiff life. So we're in St Mellons on the east of the city of Cardiff in South Wales. And I say the second time, so you joined us for episode 25, which was the second of two I did specifically looking at community development in and affected by and being responding to the pandemic. David Clague joined us as well for that one, and there were some things you were talking about around the COVID diaries, around how you were identifying, responding to sort of need. We did that back in about, I think, May, June time,
Yeah,
I think.
June.
How are things going? Where are we at now?
Yeah, so I think we're in this strange place of having come out of that intense lockdown, and that's when we were speaking last time, where we were really only able to do our daily exercise in the community. People were really quite isolated from each other, but finding ways to connect, whether it's in gardens, whether it's at our local lake. We're further on, still with a lot of the same restrictions, but also trying to, I think, reflect on what we've learnt so far, and in a place where we're looking potentially at longer term adaptations to how we're connecting in the community, whether that's looking at what physical spaces we can make work in a community, particularly outdoor spaces, looking with local schools to invest in large covers so we can meet in groups outside under cover, if that's going to be one of our few options going forward, but also looking at trying to make our online communities capture more of how we love to engage with each other. And so it is limited, but trying to capture more of that conversation, more of that idea sharing, a lot of that creative thinking that we do face to face and need face to face to kind of bounce off those ideas off each other. How do we do that online? For us, we've seen one of our local news and infos groups really come alive in that way. It's just taken on it's a really collaborative space. It's not just a space to share news and info. It really is a space of discussion where people are sharing ideas, where they're not just posting this is what I'm doing, but they're asking questions, who would like to do this with me? And for us, that's a really exciting thing, that it's become a place of more collaborative thinking, residents that haven't met before, that are sharing their passions, that are connecting over hobbies or needs. So there's a chronic pain group that have come together through this news and info group. There's a walking group that people are talking about how can we make that work in COVID. People sharing ideas like a Friends of Hendra Lake group, and it's actually creating a space that maybe we haven't had before in St Mellons, where people can come together neighbour to neighbour in their own space. So the admins of the group are St Mellons residents, so it's not a group put on, facilitated by outsiders. It's a group organised by local people, full of local people, and it just feels like there's a growing sense of building together again and not just surviving. There's definitely issues of surviving lockdown, surviving COVID, and just how detrimental that's been to our health collectively in St Mellons, but also looking at not just surviving, but how can we start building more community and not being robbed of that imagination just because it's COVID.
And when I did those podcasts, and I had other discussions as well, and some for whatever reason didn't come about in terms of actual episode and things like that, but it was there seemed to be an appetite to want to, at the time, so we're talking sort of May, June time, wanting to be a little bit more longer term in the thinking. But of course, when you're trying to meet immediate pressing needs for some people, the here and now, and it was that kind of almost on a week to week basis. Certainly the guys in Bangor in North Wales were, and Maes Gyrchan were talking in that way. actually, what else can we do? And it was almost at that, and which was fascinating for me, was almost at that tipping point of, okay, we've got a handle on the pressing, the emergency, the urgent. I think conceptually almost people had come to begin to understand what this lockdown and pandemic was going to feel like for them, be either individually or on a collective basis, communal basis. So people were looking ahead. So it's great that now, what we're now with sort of mid-October, 4 months, can't do the maths, 4 months further on, that actually that has begun to happen for yourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's lots of other conversations going on that I'm part of at the moment, talking about place and space. And one of my concerns with the online space, which is great, illustrated that really, really well, is how useful that is for connecting, is that do we risk losing the serendipities that can happen in communal, social spaces, whether those are community centres, hubs, the high street, the salon, cafes, coffee shops and so on, are the serendipities that happen in those places, do they happen online to the same extent? They might happen in a different way, but do they happen to the same extent? And that's a slight concern I've got, unless of course can we fashion them, can we create them? And I just think it's interesting, just to maybe on a practical level, I mean very, very simplistic, but I think critical base. It's not just saying what you're doing, but actually that phrasing of what you're doing as a question to other people. Do you want to come and join me?
Yeah.
For me, seems really important and significant, because it's that opening up. It's inviting contact.
Yeah.
It's not a passive, this is what I'm doing, and making someone else almost have to be brave enough to make that step and say, well, can I ask? Can I come along? Opening up like that.
Yes.
We talk about appreciative inquiry and open forms of questioning and things like that. That to me seems to be one of the simple but potentially very effective ways in which the online can maybe bring about some of those serendipities.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been really lucky with, I think, the moderators, the admins of this particular group, that they, I think, have that as a gift themselves. So they, in the group, will often ask questions, and that's been really interesting, because I think it's helped that sense of this is a space to ask those questions. And so one of the admins will sometimes just post in a group of upwards to, I think, about 2,000 residents now, how are people doing, and what a question to ask 2,000 people, how's your day going? But it's difficult to do that online, but I think it's put across this desire from the admins that this is a space to talk, to be in discussion. And I think it does take some vulnerability to say, would people like to do something with me? And I think that needs to be nurtured in a space and really protected in a space, that people feel I can ask this question and people won't think I'm a bit daft, or people won't think it's a stupid idea. So I think for us, the admins of this group have been great, but actually the community's response, this really positive response to people's ideas, which actually can happen on social media in a really interesting way. Things like on Facebook, just your like or your heart emoji, those type of things that
and your memes and your gifs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So even if you're not responding to say, yes, I would like to do that, when somebody says, oh, would anybody else be interested in a walking group, and 100 people like it, it creates that sense of we want to hear each other's questions, we want to hear each other's passions.
And that can be a worry sometimes with social media, is particularly if you're not the sort of person that's chasing the followers and the likes and doing that kind of thing, is that it can feel like you're shouting into the wind.
Yes.
So you put something out there, but you don't know necessarily. I mean, you can go into the analytics and you can see about impressions of a tweet, but my gut feeling is your average person on Twitter doesn't know that is there, or that is even a thing, a Twitter impression, for example. Okay, so that sense that you're shouting into the wind, it can actually be quite disempowering, because you don't feel like you're being listened to.
Absolutely.
So that I suppose is something, but of course you then get a sense of, okay, well, just because someone's liked it doesn't mean they're going to come along, but they might tell somebody.
Yes.
So you're getting there's some ripple effect.
Yeah.
And there's some kind of return, if you like, on investment to bastardise the phrase, of you putting something out there, whatever the activity is for, whether it's for Hendra Lake or it's walking, pain management, clearly quite a niche, specific focus to that group. Yeah. But of course, these people aren't defined by the pain.
No, absolutely.
They will have other interests, and that's where this stuff then begins to spark.
Yeah, you're right. That I think the responses to making things happen can still be quite a small group of people that are actually responding, saying yes, and then possibly even a smaller group that have said yes to actually that will act on it. So it can still be quite difficult, I think, actually organising those things. But I think having this space where the community can say yes, we want this and we want you to do it, and I think there's just such a appetite at the moment for peer-led and really locally led groups. People don't want them to be put on for them, and I think people have just really responded to neighbours that they know or don't know but are now meeting over Facebook and realising, oh, you live a couple of streets over from me and you want to put on this group. People are just so positive about that there's just such an atmosphere of encouragement, and actually I think that's been just a really hugely redemptive thing when local people have maybe existed in an environment where larger groups and services haven't encouraged people and have maybe disempowered people from taking initiative, where there's maybe more bureaucracy, some of it needed around health and safety, but you've got this group that aren't concerned about that, largely not professional. They're not considering those things, they're just responding to the idea, and I think that's really important space to have, spaces where ideas can flourish without overly bureaucratic responses to them. I think that is something that is lost in that face-to-face communication, where we think creatively together, where we kind of bounce off each other's body language and take encouragement from each other's faces and expression. But I think to have this space that actually is just neighbours has created a really much needed place for ideas to be respected. I think really, really respected.
There's no permission being asked, is there?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things, isn't it, with these sort of hub facilities, or they might take different names, sort of from public-owned, sort of local authority, council-owned sort of facilities, and they're fine in and of themselves, insofar as they're warm and they're safe and they're clean and they're welcoming, and where I can go and get a decent tea and flapjack or whatever. But I can't just go in there when I need to, when I want to, when it suits me. It's got to be within a set opening period. There's still a counter. There's still people with badges and lanyards. There's something. There's clearly a hierarchy of something there, even if it's not a particularly a kind of vast and high hierarchy, or it's a particularly kind of imposing or domineering one. There is still that sense of, I'm a guest here. I'm kind of interested, for somebody that's confident and assertive enough and male enough, frankly, and old enough and white enough to be able to just feel comfortable in that space is not a problem for me per se. But trying to analyse it from a different perspective and trying to kind of walk a mile in someone else's shoes, I'm not sure that those spaces are necessarily convenient to the things that you're talking about. Problem solving, coming up with ideas. That kind of sense of almost trying to find out what's going on here. So not just what's on the surface, but that kind of scratching beneath the surface to go, oh, actually, this is because people are feeling this way. Well, that's because this has happened. I'm still not sure necessarily that online is is a panacea to any of that. I mean, like you said, you're still talking about moderators and administrators, but there does seem to be less of a requirement of asking permission to do these things.
Definitely that. It is a sense of you're free to ask what you want. You're not saying, can I set up a walking group, saying this is what I'm going to do, and other people come around it. The moderators are great. They're very light, and so sometimes discussion can get heated. Someone might say, oh, well, you can't do that because of this rule around COVID, and it's fleshed out in sometimes a heated discussion. But in that as well, you get people's passions of saying, this is why I want to do the group, and this is why the group's really important to me. And actually, really important conversations around the rules around COVID and actually their impacts on people's mental health and the balances of risk. There's a difference to completely flouting the rules and weighing up risk around the parameters, the rules, where the rules aren't very clear. And I think where organised groups are going to be much more cautious on that, people in the community are going to be less cautious probably, and that is because they have a much more heightened awareness, are experiencing themselves the huge impact on their health, physical and mental health, and their emotional well-being and their social health of these rules. So it's really interesting because you do get some interesting discussions, and again, because it's peer-to-peer, neighbour-to-neighbour, they're not moderated by someone, an outsider, a person of more power that weighs in and draws the line on that. It really is fleshed out. So it's interesting that discussion can happen in that way, and there's definitely problems with it because of social media and the way in which people react to each other on social media that they wouldn't face to face. But there's also the benefit that sometimes social media, people that aren't necessarily confident face to face can speak in a different way on social media, and of course there's the flip to that as well, that people aren't as comfortable with written communication as they might be with verbal communication, but it opens up a different kind of space. And I think for St Mellons, because there haven't been many spaces for that kind of collaborative thinking, for us, being pushed online by COVID has actually really helped the community find a space, yes, a virtual online space, but a space where people can meet and share ideas. And I've not seen that in the 10 to 15 years I've been working in St Mellons and then living in St Mellons. I've not seen that kind of space where ideas are shared so freely.
But it's a large area as well, isn't it? We're not talking, a small sort of remote, housing estate somewhere. It's quite sprawling, isn't it now?
Yeah, about 15,000 people.
I was going to put you on the spot and say, do you know how many? But you're talking quite a large area.
Yes.
So even in the inverted commas, the best of times, that online medium probably does help traverse some of that scale, that density of population. But I suppose as well, almost, it's the fact that, and this has been a recurring theme to a certain extent with recent episodes, also any number of conversations I've been having is around, well, actually, that kind of work dogma. Because people have been furloughed, because people have had fewer hours, and that brings with it its own complications and difficulties. Because certainly during the summer, children were off school; they were off school beforehand as well, enforced. Is that actually people have had less work to do?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm generalising and simplifying massively there, but I think there's something in that, and so actually it's freed up people's minds, if you like, to go, okay, what can I do? And there's almost this kind of, Raymond Williams talked about this, cultural democracy, this sense that actually I can get involved in a very democratic way. It's not been mandated, it's not been forced, there's not been a big stick telling me to do it. I haven't been incentivized by, some sort of cash incentive or whatever. I've wanted to do it because I can see that I'm contributing to something that has a cultural dividend, and that might be in the form of getting involved in the environment, or the ecology, or it might be trying to do something around. I loved how you were talking about distributing the activity packs to families earlier in the lockdown, helping keep kids just interested and stimulated and so on. Whatever that might be that people have got involved, that sense that it feels a bit more democratic, I think is I think has been really enriching. And I do wonder whether in maybe, I don't know what it is. Is it 1, 2, 5 years time? We look back and go, do you remember that time? In the same way we were talking when Santa came on his sleigh during the middle of June in his Hawaiian Santa visit. Look back and go, okay, that was a bright spot in what was a difficult time. That have got a sense of humour and oddness about it, incongruousness about it. But that sense that actually over a prolonged period of time, I felt more attached to somebody, something, Hendra Lakes, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I really hope that we keep this profound sense of place that people, I think, have gained in their community, that it's not just about people but really belonging to a place. And I think when we were in that time where you could only do your daily exercise within distance of your house, I think people felt a fresh sense of, this is my place of belonging, this is my community, and a real physicality to that, because we were limited to that physicality in a new way, and you are then aware of both the limits of that physicality, what's there for you, but also all the assets of that place, all of the benefits of it. And so for us, I think there are people, and myself included, that during that time have become freshly aware of the really important places to us in St Mellons, the Hendra Lake being one of them, and also then the things that we are missing and they're not in our locality, and not having enough spaces to gather as community that are our spaces has, I think, really emerged. But again, that sense of people taking responsibility and not asking permission, and there's been a number of people get involved in clearing the local lanes when they became overgrown, so that children weren't cycling on the road, they could cycle down the lanes, so that prams and wheelchairs could still go down the lanes. Litter picking, removing fly tipping. And when you talk to these people, they say, I'm really fed up of when people say, oh, the council should do that. And yes, we want to, hold our council responsible to doing the work it should be doing, absolutely. But these people saying, no, we want an attitude as well where we recognise the responsibility we have and the freedom we have to care for our own estate. And again, in that time, people weren't asking permission. And I hope that continues, that people just continue to do what they want, that they are our lanes, and if people want to put daffodils, sow daffodils in the lanes, then do that, and if people want to clear them, do that. And I think that sense of having taken back our communities and that they belong to us, and the ways in which I think some of those big organisations like the council struggled to respond, weren't flexible enough to respond quickly, so for sure, left that space that it had to be local community people. Even if it gets to a place where it doesn't have to be local community people, I hope that it becomes shaped around that, and that it has to be local people doing it. And it's a time where organisations have got back more involved with the community, that it becomes shaped around those local people, and that sense of responsibility and ownership, I think, that we've reclaimed because of COVID.
Somebody has started mowing their lawn, and I don't blame them. I have the final cut of the summer to do on mine as well. Helen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Quick plug for Hope St Mellons as well.
Yeah, so do follow us on social media, at Hope St Mellons on Twitter and on Facebook.
Thank you for listening to the Community Development Podcast. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at comdevt.podcast, COMMDEVT podcast. And to support the podcast and help it share learning, connect the workforce, and raise the profile and the merits of community development approaches, why not become a Patreon at patreon.com/the CD podcast.